What if I told you that nearly 20% of all human progress that we've celebrated over the last 30 years is actually just an illusion?
I mean, it's a profoundly uncomfortable thought, isn't it?
It really is.
We like to believe the graphs are, always pointing up and to the right.
We absolutely do. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are unpacking a really dense and totally fascinating 15-page academic research outline that you, our listener, actually sent in.
Yeah, thank you for sending this. It is incredibly detailed.
It's titled The Dimensions and Shadows of Human Development. And right out of the gate, the central question this research poses is kind of the ultimate paradox of modern progress.
Right.
It asks, are we actually getting better as a species, or are we just getting heavier, consuming more, and leaving a much, much larger destructive footprint behind?
It's the perfect framing because it attacks the way we traditionally measure success on a global scale.
Exactly.
We usually rely on averages, which, they paint a very rosy, comfortable picture.
Averages hide a lot of sins.
They really do. But your sources gave us a mission today. We are going to deconstruct this comparative analysis between the massive, messy global average of humanity and a highly specific, totally fascinating outlier.
A small Caribbean island nation called Grenada.
Exactly. We're using Grenada as a lens.
Yeah.
The goal is to figure out what a perfect, or at least, a highly optimized human development model might actually look like in the real world.
Right.
And more importantly, what our traditional metrics are deliberately hiding in the shadows.
Okay, so before we get to the island exception, let's establish the baseline. We have to talk about the headline number.
The big one.
The big, shiny metric that politicians and macroeconomists just love to point to at global summits. It's called the Human Development Index, or the HDI.
Right.
According to the research you shared in 2023, the global HDI reached a historic all-time peak of 0.756. Which, I mean, that sounds amazing on the surface.
Yeah, we broke the record.
Right, humanity is winning.
And that is exactly where the 15-page report places a massive dark asterisk. Because, while 0.756 is indeed a historical record, it is a gross figure.
Okay.
The moment you deduct the literal environmental cost of achieving that standard of living, and then you factor in the incredibly unequal distribution of that progress across different social classes.
The number just tanks.
Yes. Humanity's true progress shrinks by nearly 20%.
20%.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a fifth of our supposed progress, just completely evaporating when exposed to reality.
It introduces the core pain point of our entire discussion today.
Which is?
That our traditional metrics might just be celebrating fundamentally unsustainable growth. We are patting ourselves on the back for climbing a ladder that is leaning against the entirely wrong wall.
I need to use an analogy here because that 20% shrinkage is just wild to me, and we really need to understand the mechanics of it.
Go for it.
It feels exactly like the business of flipping houses.
Yeah.
Imagine you buy a dilapidated house, you slap a fresh coat of premium paint on it, you install luxury appliances, you list it for double the price.
Okay.
The listing price, that's our 0.756 HDI. It looks incredibly successful. But what the listing price doesn't show is that the foundation of the house is actively sinking into the mud.
Right, which is the inequality.
Exactly, that's the inequality. And to pay for those luxury appliances, you took out a toxic loan that you could never repay.
And that's the environmental cost.
Boom. That's the environmental cost.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it, actually. The global HDI is the real estate listing. It tells you about the shiny appliances, but it deliberately ignores the structural integrity of the house and the debt incurred to build it.
So if you're listening to this, think about how often we see these massive development projects or GDP growth numbers celebrated in the news. We are literally being sold the flipped house.
We really are.
So how do we actually inspect the foundation? Your research lays out 5 specific coordinates, essentially a diagnostic tool for civilization. I want to spend some real time unpacking these because if we don't understand the tools, we can't understand the diagnosis.
Let's do it. The research establishes these 5 key coordinates to map human development. The first is the baseline we just mentioned, the HDI, or Human Development Index.
Right.
Historically, before the HDI was created in the 1990s, the world mostly just used GDP, gross domestic product, to measure a country's success.
It was all about the money.
Exactly. It was all about the money. If the country made a lot of money, it was considered developed, even if the citizens were absolutely miserable.
Yeah, which is a terrible way to measure human life.
Precisely. The HDI was revolutionary because it said money isn't enough. It measures three fundamental dimensions: a long and healthy life access to knowledge and a decent standard of living.
Okay.
So it tracks life expectancy, expected years of schooling, and gross national income per capita. It's the baseline measure of human capability.
The listing price of the house.
Yes. But then we introduce the second coordinate, the IHDI.
What does the I stand for?
The I stands for inequality adjusted. This is your home inspection. It takes that standard HDI number and penalizes it based on how unevenly the health, education, and income are distributed across the population.
Wait, I want to pause on the mechanism here. How exactly does it penalize the score? Because this is where the math often loses people.
It's a great question. Let's simplify the math. Imagine a room with 10 people.
Okay.
If we look at average income, and one person in that room is a multi-billionaire, while the other 9 are starving, the average wealth of that room is technically in the hundreds of millions.
Right.
The standard HDI would look at that room and say, wow, everyone here is incredibly rich and developed.
Which is an absurd conclusion to draw about 9 starving people.
Exactly. So the IHDI uses a mathematical formula. Specifically, it relies on something called the geometric mean.
Oh boy, geometric mean.
I know, but it is just a fancy way of saying it gives much heavier weight to the people at the bottom.
Okay, that helps.
If there is a massive gap between the top and the bottom, the formula aggressively pulls the overall score down. It mathematically ensures that a few billionaires cannot artificially inflate the progress of the masses.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, actually. It strips away the illusion of the extreme outliers.
Yeah.
What are the next coordinates?
Coordinates 3 and 4 are our gender lenses. We have the GDI, the Gender Development Index, and the GII, the Gender Inequality Index.
Why do we need 2 different metrics just for gender? I mean, aren't they measuring the same thing?
Because they measure 2 entirely different mechanisms of society. The GDI is comparative. It measures the exact same things as the HDI, health education income, but it calculates them separately for men and women and compares the ratio.
Okay.
It asks, are women getting the same developmental inputs as men?
So it basically measures the gap.
Right. But the GII, the Gender Inequality Index, goes a step further and looks at these structural barriers and the power dynamic.
What kind of barriers?
It looks at maternal mortality. How dangerous is it to simply give birth? It looks at adolescent birth rates, which deeply impact a girl's ability to finish school, and it looks at political representation.
I see.
It measures the actual loss of achievement within a country because of entrenched gender inequality.
So the GDI shows us if women are getting into the classroom, but the GII shows us if they are allowed into the boardroom or if their bodies are being protected by the medical system.
Perfectly stated. And finally, the 5th coordinate, which brings us to the most urgent part of the research, the PHDI.
The P stands for planetary right.
Yes, planetary pressures adjusted HDI. This is the toxic loan on the house. It takes the baseline human progress and penalizes it based on a country's carbon dioxide emissions and material footprint per capita.
So it's literally asking how much of the earth did you have to destroy to achieve this standard of living?
Exactly. It forces an accounting of the ecological debt. So those are our 5 coordinates: HDI, IHDI, GI, and PHDI. They give us a multidimensional view of progress.
Armed with those tools, let's look at the historical timeline. The research maps out a 30-year global view.
Yeah.
And if we look at the raw data, the historical trajectory of humanity since 1990 is undeniably impressive.
It really is a steep climb.
Yeah, in 1990, the global HDI was sitting at a mere 0.60. Over 3 decades, it just marched steadily upward.
And we have to acknowledge the mechanisms behind that climb. Moving from 0.60 to 0.756 isn't just numbers on a page.
What does it actually look like on the ground?
It represents the global expansion of childhood vaccines, massive infrastructure projects bringing clean water to remote villages, the explosion of the internet, democratizing access to knowledge,
Right.
and hundreds of millions of people being lifted out of extreme poverty through globalization.
It's billions of people gaining access to basic dignity. Year after year, life expectancy ticked up, schooling ticked up. But then as we trace the line on the graph provided in your sources, we hit a massive glaring anomaly.
The 2020 to 2021 drop.
Yeah.
For the first time since the index was created in 1990, human development didn't just slow down, it actively went backward. In 2021, the global HDI dropped down to 0.742.
Driven primarily by the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously. But I want to explore how that actually rippled through the metrics. It wasn't just people getting sick, right?
No, it was a cascading systemic failure.
Yeah.
Yes, life expectancy took a brutal, immediate hit globally due to the mortality of the virus, but the expected years of schooling also stalled or reversed.
Because of the lockdowns.
Exactly. Global lockdowns kept hundreds of millions of children out of classrooms, many of whom literally never returned. And economic outputs plunged as supply chains froze. That drop to 0.742 effectively erased roughly 5 years of human development progress almost overnight.
5 years of human progress wiped out in 18 months.
Right.
That really puts the fragility of our systems into perspective. But the data for 2023 shows a sharp rebound. We bounced back to 0.756. We recovered the lost ground.
We did. On a macro level, humanity as an aggregate proved incredibly resilient. The global system absorbed an unprecedented shock and managed to right the ship.
Okay, I have to challenge this narrative, though.
Let's hear it.
A global rebound to 0.756 sounds great. I'm glad the line is pointing up again, but this is exactly what we were talking about with the flipped house analogy. Average numbers mask localized pain.
They do?
If we celebrate this 0.756 rebound, we have to ask who is actually rebounding. Is the whole world thriving again? Or are a few wealthy nations pulling the average up while the rest of the world is still trying to get their heads above water?
That skepticism is entirely justified, and it is the precise reason why your research outline pivots here. To truly understand what a sustainable high development model looks like, we cannot rely on the global aggregate. We have to isolate an outlier.
We have to look at Grenada.
We have to look at Grenada.
This is where the story gets really compelling. The research positions Grenada as a leapfrog nation. So let's look at the data. In 2023, while the global HDI rebounded to that 0.756 average, Grenada achieved an HDI of 0.791.
Which is significantly higher. That 0.791 score places this small Caribbean nation firmly in the high human development tier.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, out of roughly 200 countries and territories measured globally, Grenada ranks highly, punching far, far above its weight class.
And this challenges a very deep-seated assumption most of us have. I think when you or I or anyone listening pictures a nation with high human development, our brains automatically default to picturing massive, hyper-industrialized superpowers.
Yep.
We picture sprawling tech hubs, endless shipping ports, massive GDPs, and skyscrapers. We equate scale and mass industrialization with human thriving.
It is a deeply ingrained bias. We assume you need a massive engine to generate high development, but Grenada's 0.791 completely shatters that assumption. Grenada is a small island developing state, or what the UN calls a SIDs.
Okay.
And historically speaking, small island nations possess extreme structural vulnerabilities.
Right. Let's unpack those vulnerabilities. If you are an island nation, you don't have a massive internal landmass to buffer you. You are hyperexposed to climate change, specifically rising sea levels and the increasing frequency of devastating hurricanes.
Exactly. And economically, their systems are usually quite fragile. They don't have diversified industrial bases.
They usually rely on just one or two things, right?
Precisely. They are often reliant on one or two sectors, primarily tourism or perhaps specific agricultural exports like spices. Grenada is literally known as the Isle of Spice.
Right.
This makes them highly susceptible to global supply chain shocks. If a pandemic hits and global travel shuts down, their primary economic engine just completely stops.
If a hurricane hits Texas, the U.S. economy absorbs it because California and New York are still running. If a hurricane hits Grenada, it hits the entire national GDP all at once.
Precisely. They lack the massive geographic and economic shock absorbers of larger nations. Yet despite those inherent vulnerabilities, Grenada's developmental trajectory demonstrates a profound, almost counterintuitive resilience.
They're beating the odds.
They really are. They have leapfrogged traditional heavy industry development models to achieve top-tier human outcomes.
Let's make this concrete with some actual numbers. I want to look at health and longevity, which is one of the core pillars of that HDI score. After that terrifying cliff edge drop we talked about in 2021, the global average life expectancy finally bounced back to 73.3 years in 2023.
A solid, if fragile, recovery back to the pre-2020 baseline for the average human.
But then you look at Grenada. In 2023, the life expectancy for a citizen of Grenada is 75.2 years. They are beating the global average by nearly 2 full years.
That is substantial.
And if you dig deeper into the raw data, Grenadian women are expected to live to 78.3 years.
The significance of maintaining that advantage in a post-pandemic world cannot be overstated. When a highly vulnerable island nation keeps its citizens alive 2 years longer than the global average, it tells us something profound about the hidden mechanisms of their society.
What does it tell us?
It means their community health infrastructure, their public health policies, and their underlying social fabric didn't just survive the 2021 cliff. They absorbed the shock better than many nations with vastly more financial resources.
It proves that human longevity isn't just a product you can buy with sheer economic mass.
Exactly.
You can't just throw billions of dollars at a healthcare system and guarantee long life. There is an efficiency, a community-level resilience in how they protect their citizens.
They are converting whatever resources they have into actual lived human years at a highly efficient rate. Whether that's through tighter community support networks, localized food systems, or accessible preventative care, the outcome is undeniable.
So Grenada proves that high development, keeping people alive longer, scoring highly on the index, is totally possible without a massive industrial footprint.
Yes.
But as we promised our listener, we aren't just here to look at the shiny numbers. We have to inspect the foundation of the house. We have to look at the shadows.
And this is dark.
It does. Which brings us to the most sobering part of the research. The shadow of inequality, or what the report terms the value shrinkage.
This is where we apply that second coordinate, the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted Index, to see who is actually benefiting from this global progress.
And the data here is absolutely staggering. When the researchers applied the inequality lens to the global numbers, they found that in 2023, the global human development value suffered a 21.95% loss.
Nearly 22% of human potential essentially erased. It exists on paper, but it doesn't exist in reality for the vast majority of the population because it is hoarded by a tiny fraction at the top.
The research provides a staircase graph that shows how the value physically shrinks as it moves from the theoretical HDI down to the actual IHDI. It's like watching water pour out of a bucket full of holes.
Yeah.
You start with that proud 0.756, and then you just chop off a fifth of it. So we have to ask the critical question, what is the ultimate culprit here? Why are we losing so much value? Is it because healthcare is unequal? Is it because education is hoarded?
Well, while inequality in health and education certainly play a role, for instance, global inequality in educational access caused about a 21.4% loss within the education subindex.
Okay.
The data is very clear on the primary driver. The ultimate culprit, the heaviest weight dragging human development down, is income.
Income.
Yes, income inequality caused a devastating 30.35% loss in the economic dimension of human development globally.
A 30% loss. Let's sit with that for a second. Think about a pie.
Love a pie analogy.
It works perfectly here. It's like we, as a global society, baked an economic pie that is 20% larger than it was last year. We are super proud that this giant pie, GDP is up, the stock market is soaring.
Right.
But before the pie even leaves the kitchen to be served to the guests, one person at the table walks in, slices off a third of the entire pie, and takes it to their private room.
And everyone else just watches.
Yeah. So when the pie finally reaches the table, the mathematical average pie slice looks bigger on paper, but your actual physical slice that you get to eat is 30% smaller than the math suggests.
That is a perfect visceral illustration of the Gini coefficient at work, which is the economic concept underpinning these inequality losses. When economic gains, the growth of that pie, are disproportionately captured by the top 1%, the standard HDI gets artificially inflated by their extreme wealth.
It's an illusion.
The IHDI corrects this. And when you apply that correction, the lived reality of the working class global citizen is revealed to be vastly poorer than the global average implies.
It's a massive penalty on human thriving. So if you are a policymaker or just a citizen looking at this data, the obvious question is, how does a society combat this? If wealth hoarding is the biggest drag on human development, how do you fix the foundation of the house? How do you ensure the pie actually makes it to the dining room table?
If we look at the historical mechanisms of social change, the most reliable systemic equalizer against extreme wealth hoarding has always been knowledge. Education is the ultimate democratizing force.
Why, though? Walk us through the mechanism of that. How does a book defeat a billionaire?
It's about leverage. Education provides upward mobility, yes, but more importantly, it challenges entrenched power structures. It theoretically forces a more equitable distribution of economic gains by creating a highly skilled labor force that can demand higher wages, unionize effectively, and innovate new economic models.
Okay, I see.
An educated populace is harder to exploit. And this, importantly, is exactly where Grenada's strategy sharply diverges from the rest of the world.
This is where the research just blew my mind. We're looking at education as the primary weapon against inequality. And Grenada's data here isn't just good, it's a complete paradigm shift. Let's look at the knowledge blueprint outlined in your sources. We use a metric called expected years of schooling, or EYS.
To clarify the metric, EYS calculates how many years a child entering the school system today can expect to receive, assuming the current enrollment rates stay the same throughout their life. It's a projection of a nation's intellectual investment.
Okay, so the global average for expected years of schooling sits at 13.04 years. Basically, kindergarten through the end of high school, maybe a semester of college or trade school. That's what the average global citizen can expect. But Grenada's EYS is a staggering 16.577 years.
Over 16 and a half years of formal education.
I really want to emphasize the reality of this gap. It's roughly a 3.5-year difference. Think about what happens in those 3.5 years. In human terms, that is the difference between stopping your education on the day you graduate high school versus going on to get a full, rigorous 4-year university degree.
It changes everything.
Grenada is essentially providing an entire collegiate-level educational advantage over the global average.
And we have to consider the compounding effect of that advantage. When you have an entire population receiving university-level cognitive training, learning, advanced critical thinking, specialized skills, complex problem solving, it fundamentally transforms the economic potential and the democratic resilience of a nation.
It rewires the whole society.
Exactly. It changes the way they vote, the way they build infrastructure, the way they handle a public health crisis. It is the core structural pillar supporting their .791 HDI.
But the true miracle of Grenada's education system isn't just the sheer volume of years, it's who is receiving those years.
This is where we apply the gender lies.
Exactly. Let's pull in the Gender Development Index. The GDI, which you explained earlier, measures the gap between men and women. The global GDI sits at .955.
Remembering that a score of exactly 1.0 indicates perfect gender parity in health, education, and income. So a global score of .955 means that on a global aggregate level, women are still lagging behind men in receiving those core developmental inputs.
But Grenada's GDI is 0.94.
Which is incredibly high. It places them in the leading echelon, globally approaching absolute parity.
But when you look at the raw data for education specifically, it hides an absolute miracle. The global female expected years of schooling is 13.06 years. Grenada's female expected years of schooling, 17.162 years.
Over 17 years of expected formal education for a girl entering the school system in Grenada. It absolutely dwarfs the global female average. It surpasses it by over 4 full years.
And it's not just that they are beating the global average. Here is the wildest data point in the entire report, the reverse gender advantage.
This is fascinating.
Grenadian women are significantly out-educating Grenadian men. While the women are expecting 17.162 years of schooling, the men sit at 16.022 expected years. The women have over a full year advantage over the men within their own country.
This is a fascinating sociological outcome, and we have to ask why this happens. Why are the men leaving school earlier?
Right. What are the on-the-ground mechanisms driving this?
Well, in many Caribbean nations, and specifically in island economies reliant on tourism, agriculture, and construction, there is a strong, immediate labor market pull for young men.
Oh, like immediate jobs.
Yeah, a teenage boy can drop out of high school or skip university and immediately start earning a wage in construction or fishing or entry-level tourism jobs. The immediate financial reward outpaces the perceived long-term value of a degree.
The classic trap. Get the quick cash, now sacrifice the long-term earning potential.
Precisely. But for young women, those manual labor jobs are often less accessible or culturally discouraged. Therefore, their clearest path to economic independence and social mobility is through the formal education system, aiming for jobs in administration, healthcare, education, or specialized services.
So they still in school.
Consequently, they stay in the system much, much longer.
So what we are seeing here is that Grenada's incredibly high HDI isn't an accident. It is structurally built upon a massive, deliberate investment in human capital, specifically female education. They haven't just closed the gender gap, they have fostered an environment where women are academically dominating.
They are pumping 17 years of premium education into their female population. They are building an army of highly educated, highly capable women.
And historically, as we discussed just a few minutes ago, education is the ultimate equalizer. Economic theory dictates that if you possess the highest level of education in a society, you will subsequently capture the highest economic rewards.
In theory, yes.
You are the doctors, the engineers, the policymakers, the CEOs. You should be driving the economy and reaping the benefits.
Which leads us, unfortunately, to a massive, devastating collision with reality.
This is the darkest shadow in the report. If Grenadian women are the most educated demographic in this entire analysis, logic dictates they are dominating the economy, right? Let's look at the financial data.
To understand the local reality, we first have to look at the global baseline of the economic gender rift.
Okay, worldwide, the male gross national income, or GNI per capita, is $25,750. The global female GNI per capita is only $14,943,
Which means globally, men are earning roughly 1.72 times what women make.
almost double. And if you look at the global labor force participation rates,
Mhm.
the percentage of the population actually working or actively looking for work, it shows a massive persistent gap, 48.47% for women versus 74.1% for men globally.
It's a huge disparity.
So the global baseline is highly unequal economically. Women are working less in the formal economy, and when they do work, they are paid drastically less.
But we look at Grenada with its 17 years of female education, and we expect a totally different result. We expect parity or perhaps even a female economic advantage given their vast educational superiority.
But the data shatters that expectation entirely. In Grenada, despite men having over a year less education than women, the Grenadian male GNI is $17,644. The highly educated Grenadian female GNI is only $11,029.
Men are making over $6,600 more per year despite being significantly less educated.
The research uses this brilliant visual, a Sankey diagram, to illustrate this, and it reminds me of a totally broken, leaky plumbing system.
Oh, so?
Imagine this massive pipe. We pump 17 years of premium university-level education into the top of the pipe for women. The pressure is high, the intellectual investment is massive. But by the time that potential flows down the pipe and tries to reach the economic output at the bottom, the actual income, the wealth generation, the business ownership, the money is completely leaked out of the system.
It's just gone.
It's gone. The men who entered the pipe with less education are somehow capturing the vast majority of the economic output at the bottom. We have to ask, how is this happening? What are the mechanisms of this leak?
To understand this massive disconnect between educational input and economic output, we have to pull in that final gender metric we discussed earlier. The GII, the Gender Inequality Index, which measures structural barriers and power dynamics.
Let's look at it. Grenada's GII is 0.226, which, for context, is vastly better than the global average of 0.455.
It is significantly better. And to understand why it's better, we look at how the GII is calculated. It looks heavily at reproductive health. A key indicator of a society's care, respect, and fundamental protection for women is the maternal mortality rate. It asks the ultimate question, how safe is it to simply give birth in this country?
And the numbers here are stark. The global average is horrific. 216 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births.
And in Grenada?
In Grenada, it is incredibly low, just 21.1 deaths per 100,000 live births. It's exactly 1/10 of the global average.
This raises a profoundly important yet deeply contradictory synthesis of the data. When you look at the 17 years of education and you look at a maternal mortality rate of just 21.1, the message is undeniable. Grenada deeply values its women.
Yeah.
It protects their physical health at a world-class level, and it invests heavily, almost unprecedentedly, in their minds.
There's a massive but here.
But when it comes to the labor market and the overarching power structures of the economy, there is a rigid, invisible ceiling enforced by entrenched patriarchy. The power dynamics within the economy are stubbornly resistant to the educational reality.
Meaning what exactly?
Women are getting the degrees, but what happens next? They aren't getting the C-suite jobs. They are denied access to the entrepreneurial capital needed to start businesses. They are disproportionately burdened with unpaid domestic care work, which pulls them out of the formal labor force entirely.
So the structural patriarchy of the economy is actively overriding the meritocracy of the education system.
Precisely. In the tourism sector, for example, women might hold all the front desk or housekeeping jobs, the lower-paying roles, while the less educated men hold the management positions or own the lucrative transport and tour companies. The system protects their bodies and cultivates their minds, but it actively restricts their wallets.
High education is failing to translate into equal economic power. That is the leaky pipe. You can have all the degrees in the world. You can be the smartest person in the room. But if the societal structure doesn't allow you to monetize that knowledge, the value of that education shrinks.
And while Grenada is the localized example here, providing a stark contrast because of their high educational inputs, this is a profound global warning. You cannot just educate your way out of inequality if you do not simultaneously dismantle the economic and patriarchal barriers that prevent highly educated marginalized groups from actually accessing the levers of wealth.
It has a heavy, heavy shadow on the concept of human progress. It shows that we are only fighting half the battle.
We really are.
So we've looked at the shadow of extreme income inequality, and we've explored the leaky pipeline of gender economics. Now we must confront the final shadow presented in your 15-page report, the literal physical cost to the Earth, the environmental shadow.
This brings us back to that final crucial coordinate we defined at the very beginning, the PHDI, the planetary pressures adjusted HDI.
Right, this is the toxic loan we took out to flip the house. When the researchers forced the global HDI to actually account for its ecological footprint, the index dropped again. Human progress dropped by another 10.053%.
The sources provide a stripping chart that visually strips away the HDI value based on two factors: carbon emissions and the material footprint, which is the sheer tonnage of natural resources extracted from the Earth.
It's eye-opening.
It is a stark visual representation of the fact that our current standard of global development is essentially a massive Ponzi scheme against the planet's future.
I'm looking at the global carbon numbers here. Globally, to maintain our 0.756 HDI lifestyle, the average human is emitting 4.54 tons of CO2 per capita, over 4.5 tons per person per year. And the material footprint is over 12.7 tons per capita. That is the weight of the stuff we extract, the minerals, the fossil fuels, the timber per person every single year.
This data point exposes the central, undisputed dogma of human development since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution.
Which is?
In order to lift a population out of poverty, in order to increase life expectancy, build hospitals, and pave roads, a nation must burn fossil fuels, extract massive amounts of resources, and fundamentally degrade its environment. For 200 years, development was thought to be inextricably, permanently linked to planetary destruction. You couldn't have one without the other.
Which is a terrifying thought, because if the developing world adopts the emission habits of the developed world, the planet literally burns.
Exactly.
But this is where the Grenada outlier provides the most hopeful data point in the entire report. Let's look at Grenada's sustainability metrics.
Let's compare the ecological footprints.
The global CO2 emission is 4.54 tons per capita. Grenada's CO2 emission is only 2.69 tons per capita.
Just over half the global average.
I want to make sure I am putting this all together correctly because the implications are massive.
Go ahead.
Grenada has a significantly higher human development index at 0.791 than the global average. They have a higher life expectancy, keeping their people alive almost 2 years longer. They have massively higher education rates, pushing 17 years for women. But they managed to achieve all of this elite human thriving while emitting roughly 40% less carbon per person than the global average.
Yeah.
How is that mechanically possible?
It is possible because they have structured a different kind of economy. They do not rely on massive energy-intensive heavy manufacturing. Their economy is geared towards services, tourism, and agriculture.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, as an island nation hyper-vulnerable to climate change, preserving their natural environment, their reefs, their beaches, their rainforests, isn't just a nice ecological goal, it is a strict economic imperative. If they destroy their environment, their tourism economy completely collapses.
So their economic incentives are actually aligned with ecological preservation rather than opposed to it.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that this is the ultimate takeaway, the absolute climax of this deep dive. Grenada is living statistical proof that the traditional dogma is a myth.
You don't have to burn the planet to succeed.
Right. You do not have to destroy your local environment or the global climate to achieve high human development. Grenada is executing a green development model. They are actively decoupling human thriving from planetary destruction.
They are showing that the two lines on the graph, human progress and carbon emissions, do not have to move in the exact same direction. You can have the HDI line go up while the carbon line stays flat or actively goes down.
And this is incredibly hopeful, because if a small island developing state with all its inherent economic fragility, geographical isolation, and structural vulnerabilities can achieve an HDI of almost 0.8 while keeping its carbon footprint under 2.7 tons, it serves as a powerful, undeniable indictment of heavily industrialized nations.
Oh, absolutely.
When massive superpowers claim they simply must emit 15 or 20 tons per capita to maintain their standard of living, Grenada's data proves them wrong. It proves that extreme carbon emission is a choice of resource allocation and convenience, not a developmental inevitability.
That is profound. Think about that for a second. It's a completely different paradigm for what success looks like on a national scale. It says we can live long, highly educated, fulfilling lives without bankrupting the Earth to do it.
We just have to choose to do it.
Okay, let's bring this all home. The final page of your sources offers a strategic summary, and it's time for us to recap the mission we set out on at the beginning of this deep dive. The research you sent us reveals a really complex, deeply nuanced reality about where humanity stands today.
Yes, global development has successfully rebounded from the horrific drop of the pandemic. We hit 0.756. We are undeniably living longer, healthier, and more educated lives than we were in 1990.
But that global progress remains dangerously fragile. It is the flipped house with a sinking foundation. It is propped up by severe environmental damage, the 10% PHDI penalty, and it is hollowed out from the inside by extreme income inequality, which erases over 20% of our actual gains.
Yeah.
The traditional metrics, the shiny averages, are hiding the fact that our current global model is unsustainable.
Conversely, we looked at the outlier. Grenada offers us a genuine working blueprint for the future. They prove that you can achieve top-tier human development through ultra-high educational investment, specifically giving women 17 years of premium education and protecting community health, all combined with a low-carbon sustainable footprint. They are the model of decoupling growth from destruction.
However, the research identifies one final, crucial hurdle. The Grenada model is almost perfect, save for one fatal structural flaw. The world in Grenada specifically needs to figure out how to shatter the invisible economic ceiling.
The leaky pipeline.
Exactly. They have to fix the leaky pipeline that prevents highly educated women from actually capturing the economic value of their own knowledge. You cannot have a flourishing, truly equitable society where your most educated demographic makes drastically less money than your less educated demographic simply because of entrenched patriarchy.
It is a massive inefficiency in human capital. The education builds the immense potential, but the structure of the economy must eventually provide the release.
And that leads me to a final thought, something for you, our listener, to really mull over as you close out this deep dive. You have to wonder what happens to a society when its most educated, intellectually capable demographic is consistently underpaid, undervalued, and locked out of power in the market.
It's a ticking clock.
It is. Does the sheer weight and brilliance of that educated talent eventually force an inevitable, perhaps messy, restructuring of the economy to finally reward those women? Or does it spark a massive, tragic brain drain? Do those women eventually look at the economic reality, take their 17 years of premium education, pack their bags, and leave the island entirely to find a country that will actually pay them what they are worth?
It is the ultimate tension. And how that tension resolves will dictate the future of human development, not just in Grenada, but globally.
The data has shown us the tension building over the last decade. The next decade is going to show us the snap. Thank you so much for sharing these incredible sources with us. It's been an eye-opening journey. And it's a powerful reminder that true progress isn't just about watching the index numbers go up on a spreadsheet. It's about who actually gets to enjoy the climb, who gets to sit at the table, and whether the mountain itself survives the ascent.